just a little bit about what Florida Forest Service does. You guys get a better understanding of the resources here available in South Florida, and then how I might be of service for you all. But going into ecosystem services, what does that look like in urban areas? How are they calculated, evaluation methods, and then what are some tree traits that might influence ecosystem services? And then I'll pass the baton. So in terms of the Florida Forest Service, there's kind of two main areas of its mission. So forest protection, that's where wildfire, prescribed fire falls in. Most of the people in our district work in that area. And then I work for you all as the county forester under the Cooperative Forestry Assistance Program. So forest protection, forest stewardship. In terms of forest stewardship programs, we have any technical assistance, and specifically here, what would be of use is likely going to be the urban and community forestry programs. We have some grants that are available, so please feel free to check them out. We actually have two that are open currently, one under the Inflation Reduction Act, and then also capacity grants, so a lot of tree planting opportunities for cities, municipalities, but also nonprofits. Also, the 2025 Tree City USA applications or the submissions are ready to be given. If you've completed all the requirements, you can go ahead and start doing that for the 2025 year. This is my information, and I do cover Palm Beach down to Monroe County. So if you are located in that, feel free to save my information, or I can help you get connected with someone else that might be able to serve you in and around our 4 counties. So I'm going to begin with what are ecosystem services. So a lot of times in urban areas, if you all work in tree services or the green industries, that might be a different story than a greater population that in South Florida, like I grew up in Broward, might not always have connections directly in work. They might be in a building. And so there can be areas where you have to actively go out or look out your window and there's urban forestry, but we might not always understand that in the greater population. And then there's others that's a part of their everyday life. So it's really understanding what are the benefits that nature provides us, and it gives us the greater understanding of the economics, policy, society, management aspects. And that's probably one of my favorite parts of that it gives us a better complete picture of all of the benefits that nature, and then later in this presentation I'll talk more specifically about trees. So you think about bees. We might not pay for bee pollination specifically, but we get all of the benefits for flowering, the aesthetics, to our food. So there are kind of 4 different categories, and I'll move into that: provisioning, regulating, cultural, supporting. And some of these are kind of hidden values that society gets, but a lot of them can also be tangible. So in the categories, provisioning, you can think of physical benefits. So those are things that you might directly consume, sell, or buy. Regulating, those are the natural processes, environmental conditions that we get from healthy ecosystems. So erosion prevention, purification of water, air. Cultural resources are often those non-material benefits. So we look out our window, we get enjoyment from that tree. That's a cultural benefit. That's not material. Supporting, the kind of all work together to make sure that we have provisioning, regulating, and cultural. So those natural cycles will really highlight the importance of the ecosystem services. So as individuals working closely with trees, or you just have a high appreciation of trees, and I think every community member will learn from the importance that sometimes we see and appreciate, and others that are those quote unquote hidden values that we might not stop to think about. So one might be the noise reduction. So if we live nearby a highway and for instance, the trees get cut down, we might notice a shift in noise. The trees might be able to deflect and then also absorb some of that noise. Shade in urban areas are super important as heat increases. And I don't know about you guys, but this summer felt really hot when I was in the field. And given those drought indexes and heat indexes, the stormwater absorption, carbon sequestration, it supports biodiversity, improved air quality. We can have exchanges in with the leaves absorbing pollutants and drawing them in, and exchange of gases, giving us cleaner oxygen to breathe. Reduce energy bills can be an economic advantage, and then improved well-being. So it's not only the hidden values, but we often feel it economically, and that might influence as landscape designers, the economic and property values that community members, and when you're designing and planning, but also energy savings as well. Crime reduction is something interesting. There's been studies that show when there's areas with a lot of trees, that's often correlated with less crime. So provisioning, we have the food, fuel, fiber, wood, all of the above. When you think about food deserts or areas of food insecurity, these have been often addressed in terms of food forest. And we had a project recently that was seeking to kind of bridge the gap and provide access to fruit for community members here in Broward. We also have forest products, so that's big in forestry, down from not only the wood, but the waste. It's all cycled. But something interesting that I always think about is that our even cellulose is found in our cell phones. So when you're using your phone, scrolling through, you can, that is part of a forest product that we get to enjoy. And also when we're thinking about carbon sequestration, when we're holding onto wood products, it's a greater ability to store it rather than a tree that might be decaying and releasing that carbon back in the ecosystem. It has that ability to keep it into its life cycle. Regulating services, that's often what we might think about when we talk about ecosystem services. But a great example here in South Florida and our coastal communities are mangroves. They give us shoreline stabilization, prevention of erosion, and kind of depending on the width of the forest. If it's thinner, it might not have as much protection for the wind breaks or the waves coming in or the erosion during storms as a wider buffer of a forest. So that's an important thing to think about. These are photos, some submissions from Champion Trees. So kind of trying to find the largest mangrove, and that was a fun time to go in the water and measure. But they give us benefits in terms of water quality, nutrient cycling, and then you think about all the wildlife that use those habitats. And we benefit commercially and recreationally from the fisheries. And I'm sure there's many more benefits that are not mentioned. Culturally, the heritage and identity, aesthetic beauty, I really value these things, and sometimes it's hard to describe and put into economic value. But you think about, this was a nomination of a tree for South Florida slash pine. One of the few remaining in the area due to urbanization, one of the largest that I've seen in South Florida, but then it also had a nail that was historically from the building of the railroad here in South Florida, and then was also a traditional trading post between community members and indigenous people several decades back. The recreation is another aspect that we can even think about in terms of planning for trees in our environments, natural and urban. So this is probably one of my favorite photos of a land or homeowner in the Keys. He just exemplifies the joy and fulfillment that we might be able to get from our trees. They provide beauty and also a sense of place. So having this right in front of his house, he was very proud of sharing that with me, and I really appreciate him bringing me into that space. So then there are also urban health benefits beyond maybe thinking about heat stress reduction with canopy and cover. There's also studies and relating to our ability to have better immune systems, to live healthier lives, live more active lives, restoring capacities of healing faster if trees were our green spaces were right outside medical rooms. People often improved more quickly and were able to recover. Beyond that, reducing harm, kind of that risk reduction, avoiding heat stress potential in urban heat areas. So why could we gain from trees? I've kind of alluded to several of these. And one of the big reasons is that urban heat island effect. Given we're living in a built environment, having all the impervious surfaces, the roads, the asphalt, concrete, it absorbs heat, and then that also will slowly release in the evening. So there can be even about 10-degree difference of heat in urban areas versus rural, or even differences of degrees in green spaces versus like kind of that built jungle or concrete jungle. We also have abilities to, with shade, decrease UV potential. So shading, if it depending on the canopy and how full it is or how much light is coming through, but there could be even about 50% less UV screening depending on the tree. And big important thing that I'll cover in the next slide is the evaporative cooling effect that we can get from trees. But also the absorbing of pollutants that mentioned. If we are driving around, all of the pollutants that are coming and those emissions, we can reduce CO2 and kind of have an offset. We've seen some that kind of 2% in Miami-Dade from a study that having more urban canopy could offset some of that. And then energy savings, depending on where it's placed, shading in the summer, less energy use, then, but also thinking about if it's during the winters, shading that might increase heat usage. Social spaces, people can congregate in urban areas, wildlife habitat, etc. So our urban forests also allow us to have water quality that in areas that had fewer, they had increased stormwater pollutants, chemicals, going directly into the water supply systems. And so with that associated health risks, flood damage, increased dollars paid by residents. And then the rainfall interception and evapotranspiration is really important in terms of the stormwater or flood mitigation. So if there's heavier rainfall events, that can kind of slow down and allow the ground to absorb more of the water, but then there's kind of a balance. Even in the evening, it takes up water from the ground and cools our environment. So this is a really cool infographic. It was from a study in 2016. Feel free to save it and be able to just highlight some of the benefits from urban forestry. One of the ones that I'll highlight is the energy savings. So in the study, it was about 20% in Florida savings. And then another study from 2007 found that the annual net benefits, so taking what was energy savings, but then my increases uh, in the maybe heat usage, and so based on tree placements and urban canopy, saved the county as a whole about $273,000 dollars. So why would we potentially measure and value all of these ecosystem services? It can be even in terms of planning, like we might not be able to only value the economic benefit, but if we have a better understanding of the values like appreciation of nature or the health benefits that people in terms of recovery, trying to quantify that to then understand what are the value that we're bringing to our communities, but then also just communication. And there's been a lot of conservation work that are trying to value so that there might be payments for ecosystem services to keep lands in conservation. And then also thinking about why managing and maintaining trees for a longer life cycle than just keeping shorter term life cycles in our urban forests. So this has really good information in terms of there are things that we might get and use directly, directly and indirectly, but then even just the idea of we're saving it for our future. And then maybe even just we know that it's there and we're gonna benefit from that. So for me, knowing that there's the sequoias out in California. I haven't been able to go out there, but that's a value of existence that I appreciate. Monetary methods. So there has been a lot of research, and it's really only been since the 90s that they've really tried to value these ecosystem services in more depth. Since the 70s too, but from the 90s it's picked up and been more emphasis. Excuse me. So I'll preface that no method is perfect. There can be benefit from using multiple to understand different aspects of both here in this case our market values and trying to have a dollar amount. There's also people that think like we shouldn't give it a dollar amount because that might not fully reflect the full value and it's only reducing it to a dollar amount. So revealed preference, excuse me, they give us more an understanding of the actual market data. So that might be how much people are willing to or are traveling to go enjoy these ecosystem services. If it's a park nearby, how far are they going to go travel to enjoy that park with these large urban canopies? And then hedonic pricing, so how are markets being affected by the ecosystem services? You might think about the housing. And then a large majority of ecosystem services are used by the proxy method. So how much would it cost to replace or provide this service if it wasn't there? Or so it's kind of that exchange idea. The stated preference has also given more of understanding what could be if things change or in the future based on asking individuals what they see as the value of the ecosystem. So one of the big ones is that willingness to pay. What would they pay for this service? An example is excuse me, um, the Palm Beach County Natural Areas did a study to understand how much residents would be willing to pay for increased or just the conservation and continued management for the natural areas program. They were willing to pay $122 per year in either property taxes or increased utility fees to be able to positively manage and care for the forests and wetlands and all of the benefits that they receive from those areas. Some methods of valuation, the sociocultural methods are really understanding what are the perceived values. So that's a lot of qualitative research methods. So the focus groups, the interviews, the surveys, to understand what is it beyond just the market. How do people understand and what are their opinions, but the benefits that they receive from our ecosystem services. Some integrated tools that they've developed over the years. Some of you may be already familiar with it and already been using this, but the urban forest effects model, using different forest structure characteristics, and then also the iTree suite that will have different facets, but one of the cool ones is my tree. So this was actually a tree at my office, one of the bald cypress, but looking at what it would provide over 20 years. So if it only lived for 10 years, then they would have less benefits than these listed. And a lot of these are based on like dry weight of carbon in biomass and leaf area. So all of the different characteristics of the tree. So tree traits and ecosystem services, certain tree traits might favor different types of ecosystem services. Two of the main ones that are often talked about are the leaf area and size of the tree, but also coupling that with the health of the tree. Health of the tree can maximize the benefits that we receive, and each tree species is going to have different benefits that we might receive and levels depending on these different characteristics. So this is a cool comparative study that showed the different South Florida tree species that we might receive. And then you can kind of see that in the broadleaf, they have higher capacity for carbon sequestration, likely due to the leaf area that compared to conifers. So kind of a stopping point and reflection. So if we were to want a benefit of a large tree, as managers, as community members, as whatever role you're in, it's partly learning to plan and work with the landscape that you have to better manage long-term benefits. So aside from the health of the tree, that is really dependent on right tree, right place. But also the tree species, the location that you're planting, it's gonna also depend on cultural values. Miami-Dade might have different values than Palm Beach or Broward and Monroe County. So those are things that you might have to think about. And so these are all the benefits, but there might be costs in terms of maintenance, and that would be part of transitioning into the future and thinking about how can we continue to have these ecosystems services that we receive? I have some of these resources here, and then we can maybe save questions for after we transition with John. Um, but yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and jump into the flip side of all of this, and then we'll hopefully have some time here for Q&A. Let's see here. All right. Is that looking okay there?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So for all of the benefits that trees do provide, it's good to kind of also take a look at the big picture that there are some disservices associated with them as well. Usually the services by and far outweigh the disservices, but it's definitely part of the equation to try and keep in mind that like where the costs are with trees, because some of them we have a lot of control over and some of them we do not. We have very little control over certain things that they do. But as managers, as professionals that work with trees, it's always good to, and I mean, this is just a good lesson for life in general, is focus on the things that you can't control. And there's quite a bit on the individual maintenance level that we can do. So with that, I just wanted to go and reiterate here some of the services that they provide. Um, and, Michelle kind of got at this a little bit, that some of the definitions for like what a service is are variable, and it's going to depend on values. There are certain things that are very scientific and related to the physiology of the tree, particularly like size and structure of the tree. So, and then like that influences like how the ecosystem functions. There are functions that the structure of the tree confers, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail here. But the big thing that like I also want to emphasize is that like usually tree size is very, very important in terms of the ecosystem benefits that are conferred. It's hard for smaller trees to provide a lot of the same resources in terms of the benefits that are provided as big trees. And that's just because big trees, they've got overall bigger structure. They've got more height. They can provide more shade. They just for proportionately like a few, and I got at this with the question that came up earlier, a few large trees over the same area as like relative to an area that has lots of small trees, or even a mixed assortment of trees, the large trees are going to provide way more benefits. And that's just because the structure of the trees are that like when they get taller, they're able to put out more leaf area, they're able to intercept more water, they're able to provide more shade. And so really, and that's why if you look at the way that a lot of the codes and ordinances are set up are in place to protect like legacy type trees and larger trees that might be once they get above a certain diameter at breast height, like we want to keep those trees in place as much as possible. So with that said, uh, there are some things that uh, and, and I guess going back here, I'm jumping around a little bit here, but I kind of also want to emphasize like, yeah, those are all those ecosystem services like related to temperature regulation, being able to take up water and fostering better hydrology, uh, making the soil better because like you're adding organic matter to it and like it's actually supporting something of an ecosystem and like having better water infiltration, et cetera, et cetera. But what often gets looked over a lot of the time is cultural and things. And I guess that we talked about valuations, economics as well. These cultural benefits are they can be tough to put a dollar value to. People devote a lot of resources to it, but uh, just because a tree isn't providing the most amount of ecosystem services and what we think of like providing like uh, the like ideal amount of shade or uh, being able to promote like these like preventing erosion. There are certain trees that might have high cultural significance or high significance even to individuals that have them on their property for whatever reason. And so it's really and they can alter the mood and the feel for a lot of places. And so like there's a reason why we have palms all over. They might not palms don't really provide nearly anywhere close to the amount of ecosystem services relative to trees that are the same diameters for uh their size like of their stems. But certainly a lot of cultural value that we have in those palms, and that's expressed in the fact that like we pay a lot of money for palms. So and people the demand for them doesn't seem to be going down as well. So, in order to get the benefits of ecosystem services, we also have to have trees present. And you can see here, I think that our region, uh, and so the Tri County area, Southeast Florida, and then the Treasure Coast have the lowest amount of tree canopy cover through the state. So, this is a study that was put out by Florida Forest Service in collaboration with Planet Geo, and there's a number of reasons why you can see that like you've got really good coverage up in the northern part of the state. And I think that the goal is for the state to be overall for their urban forest to be about 40%. So you can see that there are parts of the state where this is often exceeded. But in our region here in Southeast Florida, the Treasure Coast, there's a number of reasons why we probably have less. A lot of it might be cultural. I think that there is a lot of fear of storm damage going back, particularly to like Hurricane Andrew. A lot of that's a cultural memory, and I think that there's just a lot of there's a feeling that like there's just a low risk that people are willing to take on because of that. I would also say our parcels tend to be smaller and like relative to other parts of the state, there's higher population density, and so that means that particularly on residential properties, there's less of an ability to have really large trees present. And then like also, I think that like our parks tend to be smaller as well. There's just less park area. And then also, if you look here, yeah, like I said, it's a very high population density area, and people are very much compressed in the Tri-County area to almost like an island along the coast here, because everything that's out here is the Everglades. It's basically water as well, and not a great environment for growing trees or being habitable. Treasure Coast, it's almost the same deal. Uh, it's a little bit higher up. It's not quite Everglades, but the drainage is very bad around here, and so in this area, so that makes it hard for um, the lots to be very large and stuff like that as well, because people are compressed to certain spots. So here's a number of ways that trees are disservices. They can damage infrastructure, physical structures. This is really related to risk, a lot of it, and management over the course of the tree's life. They contribute to waste. You have to take this waste off the sites in some cases. There can be other economic losses, aesthetic and hygiene problems with them, security and health issues. So, and like all of these issues have kind of been independently researched and looked at, and ways that like trees are basically can be costs expressed with them in economic terms. Uh, that some of the things that we think of them being a net positive a lot of times, water quantity and quality. In some ways, like if this could be a negative thing. In order to have trees, we have to give up uh area that is going to be impermeable. Impermeable surfaces can be good for discharging water. And so, in moving it to areas that if you have flooding issues, you want to move that water to stormwater areas. And so, if we're having a lot of areas that are not necessarily impermeable, uh, like they can potentially retain water or standing water longer. There's a lot of advantages to that as well. Like that gives you better infiltration and a more natural system. But uh, there are pros and cons to these things. And the same deal with air quality is that these trees, overall, they remove a lot of pollutants. They take out dust from the air. They take out uh, a lot of the negative or the pollutants that come from cars, etc. But they also let off certain things in the air that aren't great. Isoprenes are one. So isoprenes can contribute to asthma in some cases. So they also increase humidity. They're transpiring all the time from whatever they're tapping into in the ground. That's a great thing for water control and removing water like from an area that it might be standing, but on the other hand, it's being discharged into the atmosphere. And then also, if we're contributing to trying to have urban forestry areas, areas that are urban forests, inevitably there's going to be invasive species that get in, and then like those areas can act as basically like sources of invasive species, and then that's another additional cost that we have to take into account as well. Is that like the management of the invasives that start proliferating in some, both in natural areas and in like urban areas as well. So you can see here's just somewhere in West Palm Beach. These invasive species get in and like they can be tough to pick out, but they're invasive because they put out so many seeds in a lot of cases. So this one here is a bishopwood. So so like I was saying, this is just another graphic from I really recommend you checking out this study or presentation as well. That was put out like on the cost of like maintaining and not maintaining trees. And so you can see here trees confer these different things through their these values through their structure, and then the structure provides these functional things that happen in the environment: evapotranspiration, photosynthesis, rain interception. There might be these benefits that come from all of the structure and function, but the big thing we have to take into account too is maintenance. And so the maintenance, how the way that we maintain trees, and the amount of value that of that maintenance that we put in at different points of their lives can be very meaningful. And basically, the big takeaway from this research and like this review of research, really, because they were looking at other studies, and this, take it with a grain of salt because a lot of this is coming from different regions than like we live in. But and some of it takes into account multiple regions. But for you could see here, when did the benefits equal the costs of planting a tree? So for public housing sites, it was 9 years. Yard slash street trees. So this is largely residential and transportation, 13 to 14 years, and parks and highways at 15 years. So this one, yeah, this one is looking at Chicago, but I would imagine it would not be too different throughout much of the country, even here. So trees pay back, and there's a break even time at different locations as well. So, and this is really the big takeaway that I want folks, if you can, to try and keep in mind. Like when you leave this Zoom land here and that presentation, this is just a great graphic expressing a way to think about trees and like what we can and can't control. But you can see here, there's theoretical costs and benefit profiles over the lifetime of an individual tree. And so you can see like the solid line Um, and 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 without maintenance, trees without maintenance are those with the dash lines. So you can see that. So I know you guys can kind of see as well benefits with maintenance. You can see that this is how you maximize your value for the tree is being able to maintain that tree, particularly early on. You can see that the benefits are low when the tree is young. The costs are high for this. This is you can see here the cost with maintenance. So these solid lines right here, this is when you get your money back, like for that tree. It starts providing the value that you've put into it at this point. You can see here, I think this is roughly 5-year intervals. So about 10 years, 5 to 10 years is when you're going to get that benefit typically. And then all through the course of the life of this tree, urban trees tend to not live as long. So if we're being generous here, it's going to be like, 50, 70 years. This is when you're going to draw most of the benefits from this tree. In contrast, you can see here that for trees that are not maintained, uh, and that's the dotted lines here, that the cost without maintenance is there are no costs after 5, 6 years. The tree is established, and if it's not maintained anymore, there's no value, or there's no cost related to it. You could see that it still gets a fair amount of benefits, like throughout the course of that tree, but you're really missing out like on these extended years. And when the tree is mature, reaching senescence, um, like hopefully you'll get like an extra number of years, and you'll get a better, a much more viable, like healthy tree through that period as well. And then unfortunately, all trees, once they get to senescence, they start to cost a lot more. And then eventually it just becomes a matter of like the cost with removing the tree at that point. So I just wanted to go over some of the things that, you know, that might be potential costs related to these trees. You can see here storm damage and cleanup. This is definitely one we have to think about here in Florida quite a bit. And that's why the maintenance is so important, is that if they're taken care of, hopefully there will be less of this, if they're maintained properly, when they're like via structural pruning and making sure that they are planted correctly, etc. There can be nuisance litter. There's oftentimes over management with trees. Like people are spending more than they need to for some reason. You can see that somebody came through and just sheared this tree. And then also if you're generating a lot, if you've got a high density area and you're generating a lot of this and not keeping it on site, there's a cost associated with that as well, removing it from the site. Uh, Here's more over management that goes into tree abuse. You're greatly reducing the lifespan of these trees in these cases. And then in general, neglect as well. Things that could have been dealt with in a better way when the trees were younger, uh, like could have helped them live a longer, more uh, contributing life in terms of like the services they're going to provide. So you can see here, it's a tree that they could have pruned this better. Like instead of having these like crowding out or multiple branches, you've got here girdling roots, and then maybe a tree that was planted on compacted soil. So maybe that tree shouldn't have even been there, or they would have had to go through and try and treat the site for compaction, which might have been expensive, but at least you wouldn't be putting in trees repeatedly that might be dying on the same site. There's more neglect that you might encounter. This is really the big contributing thing for like that decreases the value of the tree, or these things that can potentially shorten their lifespan. There's also unforeseen complications from invasive diseases or pests. You could see here, this is an avocado tree that's also a street tree that got killed off by uh, the blanking on like the lower wilt disease spread by a beetle. And then the right here you've got uh, lethal bronzing. And then other parts of the country that have emerald ash borer, for example, there's a cost involved. I mean, we can treat these trees, the palms as well, oxytetracycline. Uh, Ashes, it might be some kind of insecticide. But yeah, from there on out, you're going to have to weigh the benefits and costs related to treating those trees and keeping them healthy through the duration of them being mature. So they often conflict with gray infrastructure as well. You can see electrical, walkways, uh, like the impermeable surfaces that we drive on, sidewalks, driveways, etc. And then poor species selection for the site. And this can vary a little bit. You can see that this is on one side, you got live oaks, which is great because they can take a lot of abuse. But we often try to put them in places they don't really belong. And so this is something that would have had to be dealt with in the planning phase. And it for some reason they decided to put those live oaks there. This is a super common issue to run into. And this tree is gonna have to be removed much more earlier than it should have been. We tend to use a lot of species too that aren't good for certain areas. Here, Leland cypress, uh, really not appropriate for Florida, but they get used quite a bit for some reason. And then ultimately, like we have to remove all these trees as well. So just to move through a little bit quicker, here's more of the like the where we could be avoiding a lot of this is early on through good tree selection. And like we do this all the time, trying to put large canopy species in places that just don't have enough room for them. Sycamore, this is one of the largest trees in eastern North America, if it's allowed to mature to that size. Bald cypress, same deal. You can see the width of this uh, peninsula that it's growing in is maybe only a couple feet wide, but they've got the propensity to grow to like many feet, the 20 feet or more, like in diameter. Live oak as well. We put them a lot of the time in places that, you know, we think that they could fit, but in reality, they'll just become enormous if given the ability. And so if they keep growing, there's going to be more of that conflict with the infrastructure, which is definitely something that is a disservice. So I just want to point out this great resource for matching trees to the rooting space. This was put out by Deb Hilbert. And Andrew Kozer was, I think, a part of this as well. And you can see here, they go through the different species and they're able to give an idea of how much the minimum amount of planting distance that you should try and go for. So it's interesting. So planting width, you can see live oak here. Really, they should be getting 13 feet. And then if you can go to that, that's based off of a lot of times their max planting or their genetic potential. And so it can be quite big if you get the full potential in some cases here. So 27 feet. So really cool thing, resource that's out there. Before we would kind of just say, here's a general, 3 times the diameter that you think the tree is going to be or something like that. But this breaks it down into a little bit more detail. And then also, I know that like we get our max benefits, more benefits from larger trees, but smaller trees are much more they confer a lot more relative to no trees at all. So being able to line up a lot of these smaller trees to these spots where they're appropriate, that can be very meaningful. And we should be thinking about this more because we're just a lot less likely to have to take them out prematurely and then have to take in that additional cost of an early removal that is a disservice. So keep all this in mind for South Florida. Here are a pretty good list of things to use. This is not inclusive of everything. But I would like to also point out that there's a lot of natives that have additional ecosystem services in terms of like promoting biodiversity as well that often get overlooked. A lot of our native species that are native to the hammocks to South Florida, uh, they are often overlooked, but they tend to be smaller trees overall as well. And that's a good thing because smaller trees generally hold up to storms better as well. That's not always true, but overall, that's less of a profile. Most of these hold up fairly decently to hurricanes. So with that, I just also want to point out as well that like we've got control over all the points in the life cycle of the tree selection, planting, and establishment, doing all these things right, picking out trees with good grades and standards, like making sure that they're planted correctly, and then trying to establish them correctly as well, making sure that they're irrigated through the period that's critical, particularly if it's a drought. Those are going to have long-term impacts on the trees, and they're pretty high cost early on, but later on it pays off. The other thing to keep in mind too is pruning regimes, particularly while the trees are younger. It's good to have them on a cycle so that they develop good structure. So you can see here, there's been a number of studies that have looked at this. Basically, like uh, the the price of the pruning versus like the pruning cycle length, and you can see that there is oftentimes that where the marginal cost, the marginal return will even out. That is where your optimal pruning cycle occurs. Uh, this is based off of research, I think, that was done in the Midwest as well, but I think it still kind of would not be too far off here. Maybe while the trees are in this early growing phase, you might want to go a little bit quicker in 5 years, 3, 5 years. But once they start getting mature, the cycle doesn't need to be as long either. So, and also something that gets overlooked, a really powerful tool in our toolbox that, particularly in our area, that people don't think about are plant growth regulators. So we have tons and tons of trees that a lot of times that are planted in spots that they are going to outgrow. Growth regulators are one tool to potentially overcome that. You can see here a number of examples of comparing untreated foliage, treated foliage. The trees put more power, or they put more emphasis on growing into their root structure a lot of the times, and then like also their defenses, the chemical defenses they have in place. And you can see here that they tend to green up, and they they tend to live longer than the trees that are untreated, like for the same amount of area a lot of times. So something to keep in mind. The growth regulators are something that like we should keep in mind here as well. And ideally, we'll have lots of canopy area. This is much more than South Florida. This is actually campus at a university. This is LSU actually. And you can see what that looks like underneath. You can see that it's a pretty hot area. The environment is very similar there, hot and muggy relative to Florida, but it's actually somewhat enjoyable even during summer. You can walk around and it doesn't feel too bad. It's going to be 10 plus degrees cooler under these shaded areas. So, and as I know that that's not might be a big ask for everywhere to look like this or get to this point of services, but it's worth keeping these places in mind and trying to keep some of these places to this level. And then even areas that we can't keep trees, like to that level of standard of care and maintenance, it's worth keeping in mind that trees can take care of themselves to some degree. Um, And like this is a legacy tree that was actually on Palm Beach, on the island, and it's a green buttonwood, and it fell over from a hurricane, but it's still hanging out there, and the people were aware of it and wanted to keep it in place, and growing up right against the seawall, and it's still providing a lot of green and an interesting uh like thing to look at. It almost looks like a full-size bonsai type tree. So, and then I guess, just for the closing message here, you know, this neglect a lot of trees can put up with, but it's even more so on sites where the trees are able to be cared for a little bit here. This is it out at Epcot. It's an invasive, it's a camphor tree, so please forgive me for that. But um, it's incredible, like how much that trees that aren't maintained, they can live. This tree has probably been on that site since Epcot was put into place, and you can see that it's growing through all this infrastructure like for the park, but it's not really hurting anything. And so it's incredible that like this tree is still contributing. And it's probably largely a testament to the fact that like those areas are really well maintained. And so they're able to get these trees that are worth a lot because it is so large and it's putting out a lot of shade for areas that need it. And I think that the parks, and resorts for places like in the state where tourist parks, like these, they do need trees that are like this. And so like this can be kind of an example for like maintaining public areas as well. So with that, I guess I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I'm going to launch the quiz. I know we went a little bit over here. So thanks for everybody that could stick around. Um, if you can't stick around more, we'll do Q&A. And if you have to go, that's cool. We get it. You'll be able to have access to the recording as well. I'll follow up with over email here as well. But I'm launching the quiz, so go ahead and fill the quiz out, and then like we'll field questions as well through this time. Okay. Yeah, and if any of you got questions, just go ahead and please feel free to unmute yourselves. You can put it into the chat as well. We've got access through it there. We can see some of the quizzes coming through. All right. I think that is most of the folks that are still here have responded. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Then we'll go over the questions. Okay, so let's see. Which of the following generally provides the most ecosystem services in the same amount of space? So like their choices were many small trees, a few large trees, and a mixture of tree sizes, and then as many trees as possible. So invasive species included. The correct answer is actually B. So we got quite a few people that got that one. I think almost everybody picked C before. And I can see why you would want to select that. It seems like that would kind of mimic nature because of the fact that there would be diversity in sizes, uh, diversity in different species potentially as well. But really, in terms of the trees that are going to provide the most in terms of the services that we think of as the traditional services like um, water interception, better hydrology, more shade, etc. Those types of things. A few larger trees tend to provide more. You can definitely compensate for it with different tree sizes, and we should. But not everywhere can manage to have a few large trees on them. Is what it comes down to as well. So, uh, two managers generally have the most control over ecosystem services through the following. So, and the correct answer here was C, mitigating as many disservices as possible. So that's really, uh, that's where what I've tried to kind of emphasize with my talk was that good arboricultural practices ultimately lead to less disservices over the course of the lifetime of the tree and hopefully promote a tree that you're going to have live more in that mature phase where they're producing the most amount of services. So, which of the following is a disservice that tree managers often have little control over? And I listed all these things here: the use of poor quality nursery stock, girdling roots, poor structural form or presence of risk features. Those are all things that the manager could kind of take some control over. It's not always possible because you might be inheriting trees from somebody else that neglected these things. But the thing that really we don't have any control over is like how much tree emissions that decrease air quality. And some species do this more than others. But uh, I guess what I was trying to kind of point to is that no matter what, there's going to be some disservices with any tree. And, you hear a lot of people complain about messes for certain species, that type of thing. Like this is just one of those things as well. Overall, trees help air quality, but they also let off some things that are not the best either, like those isoprenes that I was talking about. So, so with that, uh, I guess folks are saying thank you. Uh, uh, yeah, I thank you all for being here. I hope this wasn't just too much preaching to the choir here. Uh, but it's good to review these things and kind of help, think about it a little bit differently as well. We oftentimes, I think, this series is geared towards people that are out there being managers, but I think that Michelle and I kind of wanted to like have you take a step back and look at it from the way that like maybe researchers and people that think about like urban forests more big picture would look at these things. So, you have anything else to say or contribute, Michelle?
I think both of these topics are um like conceptually panning out allows us to understand all of the different viewpoints and kind of work together, understanding why, like in trees on a property, like one neighbor wants different things than the others, and just even looking at the disservices and ecosystem services that people might have.
Yeah. No, I think it's really cool to think about like the social side of it too. Like that people can look at the same tree and see totally different things. like so
Yeah.
so uh well, thanks everybody for being here. Thank you, Michelle, for you know coming and giving these perspectives, from the state forest side, and definitely look forward to working with you more into the future here. So
Yes, thank you so much, John, for the invite, and thank you all for listening and being attentive too.
take care, everybody. Hopefully, we'll see you all next month. Take care.
Bye.